Hey, everybody, and welcome to the NASM CPT podcast and live webcast. So I want to say thank you so much for being here and joining us today. I really hope that as we're getting into doing some of these live webcasts, we're having guests. We're bringing guests on. And if you followed the podcast leading up to this point, we haven't really had guests. So they've just been information that's been delivered through me, I guess, as a filter. And what we're doing now, especially since we've started with our kind of nationwide lockdown and quarantine, is having guests on the show and providing perspective for things I really can't have the perspective to do necessarily, because people are very skilled at what they do. And they bring a different environment, a different atmosphere, certainly a different perspective and a knowledge base that I don't bring. And so I'm happy to have my friend and NASM Master Instructor, Tony Ambler-Wright, with us today. So, Tony, thanks for being here, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, Rick. Really appreciate it. It's good to catch up with you and see your face. I'm trying to think. The last time I saw you was about 6 weeks ago at IDEA PTI.
Yes, indeed.
And things have changed quite a bit since then. So
they definitely had. This was the last conference that had taken place, and it was in early March. So it was just a week or so before at least in New York City, before the required shutdown, which happened on May 16th. And so, yeah, man, it was right there. Big conference. Great to see a lot of fit professionals. Obviously, great to see you. And me and you and Kyle Soul did a workshop together on assessments and foam rolling. So self-myofascial, not release, self-myofascial techniques or self-myofascial rolling. And so we discussed that and there. And then I had Kyle on the show who did a great job sharing recently the research about self-myofascial rolling and different techniques and how they're applied. So today I want to talk a little bit about some kind of in a similar vein, because we did just work together on similar topics. But I want you to just give a little brief introduction to yourself and kind of historically what you do and have done for work and with NASM. And then let's get into really the topic today, which is mix it all together. We look at everything we plan on talking about today. It's about improving movement and taking advantage of some of the opportunities that we're experiencing right now to actually spend time to do that. So please, just a little bit about.
Sure. Yeah, it'll be a very little bit, but I think similar to you, about years experience in the fitness industry and have been fortunate enough to have worked in a variety of different capacities. I got my start in a large health club chain. And, you know, at the time that I got into the industry in the late 90s and early 2000s, you know, it was just such an exciting time in fitness. And, you know, that was then of, you know, functional training and a lot of the things that we take for granted today and that we see as very commonplace today were very novel back then. And so it was an exciting time for me to be able to get into the industry at that time. And you know, in 2000, when NASM launched the NASM OPT model, I went through, got my certification, and the OPT model just made sense to me. And so I was very passionate and enthusiastic about applying that with clients and saw great success with it. And, you know, to that, I wanted to educate for NASM and be a part of their team to be able to help other trainers realize the benefits of utilizing a systematic, progressive model to help their clients. And so in 2005, I joined NASM as part of their master instructor team, not too much before you. And it's crazy that it's been, you know, 15 years since then, but actually 15 years this month when Wendy, Marty, and I came. And so that opportunity with NASM led me to meeting my wife, Wendy, who's also an NASM instructor, and that took me to Phoenix ultimately from where I was in California. Being in Phoenix, got on with another large health club chain, still training clients and also doing some PT education and onboard. And at the time, NASM had recently moved its headquarters from California to Phoenix, and that afforded an opportunity to work more closely with Dr. Clark and get some referrals directly from NASM, some client referrals directly from NASM. And during that time, I started to learn more about how they were implementing the NASM methodology and corrective exercise strategies, if you will, into professional CNF. And that exposure really piqued my interest and curiosity, and I wanted to learn more. And so from there, started working with some athletes implementing OPT, corrective exercise. Started getting into manual therapy, got a license in massage therapy to be able to do manual techniques and essentially apply the systems and the model. The same framework applies some different techniques that would be reserved for that type of professional. And then from there, as a result of some of those experiences, I was able to get some clients in professional sports full time. So ended up doing some consulting with some NBA athletes, Major League Baseball. Spent quite a bit of time in New York.
We got to catch up a little bit.
That's right. Yeah. So I lived in New York for what amounted to about 2.5 years, and then after doing that more on a consulting basis, I ended up getting on board with a company called Fusionetics in 2013, which was founded by Dr. Mike Clark. And at its core, basically it's a technology company that allows you to perform the assessments that we utilize and promote at NASM, as well as the programming with a variety of different clients. And so most recently, my position with Fusionetics was more of a training and development role, education and curriculum development. And so I was with them for about 7 years. So, and that's kind of leads us to where I am today.
Just so stuck in your living room.
Stuck in the living room, homeschooling. It's been an interesting ride, but I think the great thing is, and we talk about this a lot, is that with the OPT model, the corrective exercise continuum, it provides a fantastic framework for professionals of all levels to be able to impact their clients, impact clients of all levels, right? We've seen this with your client who's brand new to fitness and exercise, or who's coming off of rehab, and seen it used all the highest levels of sport with the best athletes on the planet. So I think, that's something that we should continue to highlight and promote, because there's some misconceptions around what corrective exercise is sometimes, as well as the OPT model and how best leveraged with the clients you work with.
Let's talk about the OPT model for a little bit. So there are a couple of things that come up with the OPT model. I think it's pretty interesting. A lot of people talk about how rigid the OPT model is, and I can't help but kind of smile a little bit when I think about the numerous other training protocols that are so generally very narrow, and they don't actually provide a system that leads from one thing to the next and doesn't guide through periodization. And the other thing I'd tell people is, look, this is a base level certification, right? Like there is more. Otherwise, there would be no need to go back to school or to find some other specialties. There's always more that you can apply to the model and that you can apply the model to. So people get kind of, they look at it, and some people look at it and they say, man, this is the greatest thing ever. And I agree with you, it is an incredible model, but it's also the opportunity to take what you're interested in and find out really what's a place that I can implement it, instead of saying, I think doing this exercise looks really cool. I don't know who could do this exercise or when somebody could do this exercise. And the model actually allows for that to be put into a system, as opposed to just put into an exercise routine and say, I think this is cool and I think you like it. But, I think it's cool, I think he likes it, and it fits into what our outcome is based on our strategy. So can you speak a little bit to the OPT model and how, first of all, it's they're suggestions, not dogma, right? Like
Right.
they're guidance that we can follow, and then how people can start implementing it, because you use it really with some of the best and top athletes, and I know some of the highest paid athletes in the world, who you were working with primarily when you were living in New York City. So if you could just speak to that for a moment.
Yeah, to me, OPT means options, and the one thing that trainers, I think, what gets lost on trainers sometimes is that the basics work, and if you do the basics really well,
Nice.
You're going to see some tremendous results with your clients. I think we get into the habit of always looking for the best new thing, and we lose sight of the basics and the principles and the science that ultimately allows the body to change and adapt to an exercise program. And so, yeah, the OPT model provides a structure that you can use to design and implement a program. By no means is there only 5 ways to train a client and apply the multitude of variables that you can consider when performing exercise. But we know that there are some pretty solid adaptations that can occur from applying the exercise variables in a certain way. And for many people, that's going to be more than enough to get them to where they want to be. And if you understand the principle, understand the intention behind each phase in the OPT model, to your point, we've talked this a lot on the instructor team, is that essentially your options are limitless at that point if you understand the principles. And so, again, it goes back to, as you mentioned earlier, figuring the right place within that system to be able to maximize the effectiveness of whatever exercise, tool, technique, or strategy it is that you want to employ with your clients. And so, that's something that can't be home enough. And, hopefully we can get trainers, not only new to the industry, but those who've been in the industry for a while to be able to recognize that, and that it's not dogmatic, and really it just, I think, affords you the freedom to be able to do anything that you want with your clients. And that's really cool.
That's awesome. I know that when you're working with athletes in particular, who you've spent a lot of time with, that nothing really takes place without an assessment. And right. There are numerous assessments. I know that sometimes people think NASM only knows one assessment, and there is a lot of great value in the overhead squat assessment. But can you speak at least through some of the evidence of both the overhead squat assessment, and then can you start to talk about some of the other assessments that are utilized and that trainers even could utilize in order to know what they're supposed to do, or how to optimize outcomes when putting together an exercise strategy?
Sure. Yeah, I think, there's hundreds of assessments that you could do with a client, but ultimately you have to find that balance between effectiveness and efficiency, as well as utility. No point in doing an assessment and getting data if you're not going to utilize that to put a program together or to remeasure against later on to establish progress and validity in your program. And so, while if you were to look at some of the early NASM materials and you go through the chapter on kinetic chain assessment, I mean, it was hundreds of different assessments that you could do, from start balance, overhead squat, single leg squat, upper extremity testing, manual muscle testing, range of motion testing, and the list goes on. And all are useful. But what's interesting is we found over time that a lot of the data that you get from an overhead squat is very correlative to some of those other assessments. And so when we see compensations occur in a squat assessment, ultimately, and while it is maybe an oversimplification at times, it's a great place to start. You can always dive deeper. Ultimately, a compensation can be attributed to a muscle imbalance where one muscle may be relatively underactive or lacks the ability to control the compensatory pattern, and another muscle is overactive and leading to that compensatory pattern. And so just with that simple perspective, you can do a lot of things from a programming standpoint. And then if you implement a program based on that premise and things don't improve as quickly as you think they should, then you can always do additional assessments to maybe further drill down the root cause of what you're seeing or what your client is experiencing. And so, there's some really solid evidence around the overhead squat, its implications from a muscle activity perspective, a range of motion perspective, as well as a predictive, as well as from a predictive standpoint when it comes to injury. There was a recent study by Eckerd that showed that individuals who display movement profiles using the overhead squat and single leg squat, that they display patterns that are more highly or that are more predictive of injury risk, had a greater incidence of injury occurrence. So things like feet turning out, knees going in, excessive trunk lean, maybe an asymmetrical shift during the pattern. Those are higher risk, considered higher risk compensations, and individuals who displayed those patterns during just a transitional assessment like an overhead squat and single leg squat got hurt more frequently. And so I think there's some great utility in it. It's an easy assessment to perform. You don't need any equipment. It doesn't take very much time. And to your client, if you're not into an assessment process, it could just be part of a warm up that you do with them. You're observing them do some overhead squats, and then you take that information and you can tailor some programming specific to what you see.
And what we look at with that is it just gives an idea of which muscles may need to be folded and which ones may need to be stretched and which ones may need to be go through these activation exercises, these isolated activations, because when they start to work with their synergist, maybe these muscles aren't doing as much of the job as they're supposed to, and the synergists start to take over, which is where we get that phrase, synergistic movements. So we want to start to get these muscles to start participating more, and then put together these integrated movement patterns so everybody can be on the same page and all of the orchestra can play in harmony. So that being said, are some people when we look at this that are concerned that corrective strategies kind of get in the way of the workout. So you jumped in and you talked about it, but honestly, it doesn't take long for people to implement a corrective strategy like foam roll stretching, isolated activations before going into integrated patterns that actually seem more like a workout. Can you just kind of talk to taking a moment, relating what this looks like as a warm-up and how that supports the movement and performance of athletes and your kind of traditional clientele?
Sure, absolutely. I think, again, corrective exercise, just like any other form of training, can be applied in a variety of different ways and formats. And so, traditionally we think of it, and NASM, we try to promote it as a targeted warm-up strategy for your clients. We know that if a client compensates or demonstrates, particular patterns, that we want to try to do something about that in order to optimize their performance during their workout, training session, competition, et cetera. And so with a corrective program, taking the data from the assessment, as you mentioned, allows us to identify some muscles that could benefit from some rolling in order to decrease their overactivity. We can then follow that with some simple stretching techniques in order to optimize the range of motion that a client can move through during their workout. And then from an activation standpoint, that's where we can get into, again, just some simple exercises to help prime the body to perform later on. So, these concepts, we know, for example, that if let's say somebody sits down all day, They'll likely display limitations in hip extension range of motion because their hip flexors are kind of chronically short throughout the day, and may potentially lead to overactivity. We know that individuals who display limitations in hip extension have different activation patterns when they go to perform functional movement. So the activation ratio between the hamstrings and glutes, for example, changes in individuals who display less than ideal hip extension. And so based on that premise, that basically validates the concept of altered reciprocal inhibition, which we talk a lot about in our materials. But if we're trying to optimize a client's performance during their workout, make sure they want to get the most out of their session, if we know they've been sitting down all day, or from their assessment, we recognize that they display patterns that are consistent with overactivity in their hip flexors, it's our responsibility to do something about that prior to training, and give them some tools and resources to be able to take responsibility for that on their own too. But to your point, if we just had somebody go perform their workout and they've got overactive flexors, let's say they've communicated or shared with you that they want to improve the aesthetics of their rear end, which isn't uncommon. You can do all the glute exercises you want, but if that altered reciprocal inhibition scenario is there, then you're not going to be maximizing the performance of those muscles. You're going to be working more of your lateral hamstring and your adductor magnus. And so it ties back into client results, and that's our job, is to help facilitate and get our clients to where they've expressed they want to be. So how long really does it take to do 3 foam roll exercises? It takes a few minutes. Some, if you do some lengthening techniques, might take another couple minutes. And then from an activation standpoint, it's just you're doing core. You could do some core stabilization work. You could do some hip activation work, which we know that doing a targeted glute warm up, study by Parr in 2017 showed that when you do a targeted glute warm up, that it leads to better neuromuscular efficiency later on in the workout. So essentially, you can produce more power, more strength with less effort. You get more efficient just by doing a little bit of activation on the front end of a session. And so
I think people
it's easy. What's that?
I think people
more with less effort. Yeah. Exactly. So yeah, I think with athletes it's the same. Optimize their performance. We want to make sure that they can move through the ranges of motion and positions that they need to in order to perform well at their sport. And so we would take them through a similar process, some rolling, or depending on the environment, maybe some manual therapy techniques in lieu of rolling. Some hands-on stretching, or again, static stretching if they're doing it on their own. Then we would do some activations into a traditional dynamic warm-up process for them going and performing. So you're looking, most of the research is that you can have an impact in as little as 10 to 15 minutes. And so I think targeting the warm-up specific to the client's assessment and the training goals for the day or competition goals is going to be more effective than doing maybe more of a traditional warm up where you're just on a treadmill or elliptical or doing something to elevate the heart rate and get a little lather going on. So we're really putting our clients in a position to be as successful as possible.
Yeah, and I think ultimately you kind of mentioned it where it's a responsibility. So if we have the responsibility to provide the best workout in the safest manner possible, the most effective way, the most efficient way to do it. This is what people are paying us for. They're not paying just to make them sweat, because you can pick anybody outside. Exactly. Nobody's outside right now, but you can pick anybody outside and say, I need you to make me work out so much. Right? I need you to make me sick. I work so hard. And it doesn't take any education, take any skill set whatsoever. All it does is taking somebody to say, you've got an hour, go burpees, right? Yeah. And then they just do that the entire time. And you must be a good trainer, because I burned a lot of calories and I sweated a lot. And that's not true. We'd never do that with one of your professional athletes, never do that with one of our traditional clients. So when we look at it, really, if you can do better, it is your responsibility to do that. I mean,
100%.
our fitness professionals, we are certified personal trainers. We receive education, and too often people go, "Hey, man, as soon as I get this certificate, I can wad it up, throw it away because I'm legal now to start training." And what they don't get is that they've so focused on the destination of becoming a trainer or the destination of training a client and getting a paycheck that they've not spent the journey enjoying that opportunity to learn what to do, to how to better do it. And this kind of goes into the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Where people who are really novice at something think that they're really, really good. And in the literature for Dunning-Kruger, it's called the peak of Mount Stupid. And so when we're at the peak of that, when we start to learn more, you see this kind of uptick, and I learned a little bit, so now I'm a professional. And then you see this slope all the way down here, and that slope, as it drops down dramatically, is called the slope of despair. And that basically says that I have learned enough at this point to know that I don't know what I'm doing. And I think you who just said you've done this for 20 years. How often have you been like, oh my gosh, if I could just go back to when I was a trainer early on in my career and undo some of the things that I did with clients? And I know I've done it. I've thought it many, many times. And, they still enjoyed it. They still got value at it. But I can do better. Yeah. And as we start to do better, it's in Dunning-Kruger, it's called the slope of enlightenment. And we start to get smarter and smarter and learn a little bit more. And we're in less and less despair about injuring or hurting. And I don't know anything, but we always know enough to know that we don't know enough. And that's really when we get into that concept of being a lifelong learner, instead of always trying to be at a destination instead of going to the destination. It's that journey. When people talk about life as a journey, not a destination, is really what we're talking about. And I want to drive home the importance of all the stuff that you've done throughout your career, where it has been a journey. It has been working with mentors. It has been self-guided learning. You've spent money and gone back to school multiple times to learn from others. So, when we talk about, certification and education, it's ongoing. Everything's ongoing. So we shouldn't think that we just do it and that I'm good without all that stuff. Because here's the thing, that you could be better with all that stuff, though. Yes, maybe you are good without all that stuff, but could you be better? And at some point, you have to look at it as a responsibility for us to do better, to get better, and not just it reminds me, so it's a Maya Angelou quote that I love very much from the book I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. And she's talking about her mom and raising the children. And she said she did the best with what she had. And when she learned better, she did better. And that's a roundabout way. It's not a direct quote, but that's basically it. When she learned better, she did better. And here's the thing. So many of us learn better. We gain the knowledge to do something better, but it's too hard. It's too hard to apply it. And so learn new assessment techniques. We learn new models of training. We learn different forms of periodization. We learn a lot of different things, but that's not the hard part. The hard part is not the learning it or being exposed to it. That's not the hard part. The hard part is now taking it and making application to it. So we all learn assessments. We all learn these wonderful different things, but the hard part is applying it. Fortunately for you, you've worked with wonderful mentors. They apply it. That's what they do. They live their life applying these things. So you both learn it and see how it can be applied, and you're supported every day in that because you're around people that are doing it. Most people are not around other people that are doing it. They're not around people who are applying better, efficient ways, peer-reviewed research. What do we do when we learn new stuff? So anyway, I want to just kind of speak to that because I know it's very challenging. It's always kind of cool to learn something new. And people at the PTI conference from IDEA that we were just at, people come to our workshops. love it and they love it and they can't wait to go home and do this with somebody on Monday. But unless they do it with several clients on Monday and a few more on Tuesday and more on Wednesday and more next month and more the following month, day by day, then it just kind of disappears into the background and we're still stuck with doing an hour's worth of burpees. Yeah. So I think these types of things, these applications are really important, not just to know, but to apply.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that speaks to the power of systems as well, right? I mean, if you employ a system and you have a process in place, it makes it easier, I think, to again figure out as you learn new things where to put them into your process and then consistently execute on that. And so, yeah, 100%.
And systems. I'm sorry, Tony, but I just want to run into this real quick.
Yeah.
Because so many people are stuck at home. It can be difficult to learn new things when you may be by yourself. I hope people have roommates at least or family members that they're with, because being home by yourself is very trying. What are some of the things that they can do, some assessments that they can maybe learn or apply at home? And then the other question is, once you get an assessment, kind of talk through how people can apply assessments.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you think I went off on a tangent before getting to that point earlier. So the overhead squat is great, but there are other assessments that you can do that can help you narrow your focus when it comes to programming, and in turn that makes your programming and program design more efficient and potentially more effective. So if you can prioritize areas of the body to work on with the corrective strategy, that may require fewer exercises and techniques, and that's going to take less time for your client to be able to do, which may be something that they're all about. Fortunately, even if you don't have somebody at home, the power of technology, you can learn and implement a lot of these things over video and whether it's FaceTime, Zoom, and so forth. And so I think you and I, in order for us to get more out of our assessment process, we've utilized things like manual muscle testing and goniometric assessment, which are extremely valuable, but really reserved for a more clinical environment. Using a goniometer, which for those of you who may not be familiar, is basically a protractor type device that allows you to measure joint angles, measure different joint ranges of motion in different positions, which can then give you further insight into what tissues might be restricting a particular range of motion and in need of some lengthening techniques, as well as what muscles may need more activation and strengthening work. And so, very powerful. The one thing with an overhead squat is that it's very reliable. If you're looking at the standard assessment form, it basically uses what we call binomial scoring. You either see a compensation based on the criteria that's been provided, or you don't. So the yes/no format really makes it reliable, both from an intra and inter-rater reliability perspective. But what you gain in reliability is in sensitivity. And so range of motion testing allows you to be more sensitive in your assessment process and really maybe hone in on what might be the root cause of somebody's impairments or compensations. And then if you attack that, then you see greater change, not only locally at the areas that you're focusing on, but systemically as a result of applying the program. It takes a lot of time to learn how to use a tool like the goniometer. You have to have a goniometer, you have to have a treatment table, you have to have, ideally, in order to get most out of it. And that's just not practical for fitness professionals. In some instances, it may not be considered within their scope of practice. You have to put your hands on the client in order to be able to do that. And so, I think what we've done in the updated version of the corrective exercise specialist course is added mobility tests, which, allow you to identify and assess a client's range of motion actively So it doesn't really require you as the fitness professional to put your hands on the client. You can do them in a virtual format, right? As you talk a client through the different patterns, positions, you can still gain a pretty good understanding of where their mobility might be restricted or limited. And it allows you to get a lot of the same benefits that you might from a goniometric assessment, but in a format that's more scalable and more applicable across a variety of different environments. And so, looking at things like ankle dorsiflexion specifically, extension, hip internal external rotation, hip extension, all the way through the upper extremity, again, allows you to really identify, okay, that foot turning out compensation that I saw during the overhead squat, is it caused by a lack of ankle mobility, or is it maybe due to an overactive lateral hamstring that you would be able to identify during your knee extension assessment? Maybe it's due to an overactive TFL that's, again, combined with the lateral hamstring, causing the tibia to externally rotate. And so, again, the mobility tests allow you to refine your program design process and ultimately the strategy that you give your client. So I think, one, if you've seen good utility with the overhead squat and you're looking for something more, those mobility tests are a great place to start. And I think if you have a cohort of friends or colleagues and individuals that you can, get on a video chat with, if they're not there with you in person, the format allows you to be able to practice those things virtually, because you're basically just visually identifying against certain benchmarks what the person's range of motion is. Did that answer that part of the question?
Yeah, answered so many questions. So right. Thank you. We've got another question lined up for us. So Greg is on the other end here. Greg, can you give us what the question is? Let's see what we got.
Yeah, from the chat, we have, what are Tony's thoughts on static postural assessments such upper cross and lower cross syndromes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, there's some debate as to, if those syndromes truly exist. But I think regardless of the terminology being used, I think there's tremendous value in a static assessment. Static assessments give you some insight and give you a lens into how your clients spend the majority of their time. The body is going to the positions and patterns and postures that are maintained most frequently. And so if a client does come into you and presents with a certain static postural alignment, that may give you some insight into how they're spending the majority of their day from a lifestyle or activity perspective. And while it may be useful in the program design process, it may also be useful from a behavior modification perspective. If somebody is, sitting in a position all day and they've experienced not only some changes in posture, but maybe some other manifestations associated with that, you can coach them and guide them to modify those positions throughout the day. And so how somebody presents to you statically doesn't always translate to their transitional movement patterns or dynamic movement patterns. And so that therein lies the value of doing additional assessments. But it does give you some good insight and a great starting point to be able to have that conversation with your clients on the importance of what they do all day. Their hour-long session with you, maybe 2 to 3 times a week at most, is not necessarily going to be enough to offset the things that they're doing throughout the day. And so again, we have to reinforce some self-efficacy with the client. Reinforce that them improving and getting to their goal is just as much their responsibility as it is yours as a fitness professional.
I've got a couple of questions that I just want some quick answer to. Before we, Greg, just real quick, do we have any other questions that from the live chat that we want to address before I jump in? All right, so let's go with this. Because Greg mentioned static posture, the first thing that I thought was asked was about static stretching before exercise. So, Tony,
Yes.
This could make this podcast and webcast about twice as long as it's already been. So with that said, I want a less than 30-second answer, because too much of an answer will be too much for anybody to remember.
Yeah.
Static stretching prior to working out. I was told not to static stretch before exercise, but you are implementing this, so please explain. 30 seconds, go.
All right, static stretching. I think thing is, we're not NASM in particular. We're not recommending just arbitrary stretching. Using an assessment to identify areas that could be in need of some lengthening techniques, and that's where static stretching comes into play. So you want to be targeted in your approach and what you're stretching. Have a reason and a method behind the madness, if you will. But ultimately, the research is fairly conclusive in that, static stretches held 60 seconds or less won't have any negative implications on strength and power outcomes. And if you follow a static stretch with a dynamic warm-up process or movement preparation process, again, you're not going to see any decrements in performance measures that you might expect.
I love it. Thank you. Nice. That was 37 seconds. Well done.
All right.
Well done.
Gotta work on my brevity here.
That's the briefest I've ever seen you go. Let's do one more. And really, this is just speaking to stress. And there are a lot of people stressed out right now. A lot of elite athletes, when they get into a slump, it's not they rolled their ankle. It's because there's some mental cognitive thing going on. And I'm not saying that we need to use exercise as a means to help those athletes get over it. But what is the effect that exercise has on stress? What have you seen when you've worked with people? And what are some of these things like the movement prep that we talked about early on? How are they beneficial for stress reduction, not just orthopedically, but also in other ways?
Sure. Well, I'll try to address that as best I can. I think, and I may be a little tangential here in that, everybody's under a lot of stress right now, due to the massive change in lifestyle for everyone. And so, when it comes to exercise and the application of a program in home, you might be limited by equipment and space. And I think now is an opportune time as any to focus on things that you traditionally might not focus on if you're working out and training at the gym all the time. So, tissue health, movement quality, things that, people may not typically have time for. Now you do with very limited equipment and still see massive benefit. So when it comes to corrective strategies and programming that focuses on improving quality, I think now is as good a time as any to really try to tackle that and make that a focus. Now, acutely, there are some things that you can do to reduce stress. So we know that foam rolling, for example, and Kyle's talked about this as well, foam rolling does have an impact on reducing sympathetic nervous system activity. So if somebody comes in and they're all stressed out from the day and what went on at work and at home, just doing some foam rolling exercises can help blunt that sympathetic response and enhance parasympathetic activity, which can be very important to putting them in a good frame of mind for the rest of the training session. If somebody's really stressed out, the first thing you could do is determine that, ask them how they're feeling that day, mood state, how well they slept the night before, what their stresses are, their overall feeling and feeling of ready to perform. If somebody comes in and you can just tell they've had a crappy day, they're not giving you the impression that they're ready to get after it. Well, when it comes back to responsibility, you can modify what you had planned for the day with them. Maybe make it more of a restorative type, maybe lower intensity of the exercises, or implement programming that's more movement focused. And so acutely, I think there's some benefits to implementing some of the techniques that you would use in a corrective program. And then chronically, there was some preliminary work done that shows that individuals who who display lower movement quality. So again, individuals who have movement profiles that where they do compensations that are more highly correlated to injury risk have higher levels of cortisol, circulating cortisol. So throughout the day, individuals who move worse than somebody who displays, ideal movement patterns, they have higher levels of circulating cortisol, which is a marker of systemic stress. And so just by getting somebody to move better, focusing on enhancing their quality of movement, that may lead to a reduction in the systemic stress placed on their body. We also know that mechanically, individuals who move with those compensation patterns experience higher mechanical loading during activity, which may not affect their acute response to that training session, but over time could lead to more chronic stress and an inability to recover from their exercise program. And we all know that exercise isn't what gets you the results. It's how you recover and respond and recuperate from that stress. So
that's awesome. Thanks, Tony. Before we wrap up, I think we have one more question, and then let's close this thing out.
Yeah, Karen, all right. Karen in the chat wants to know, can you talk about knee position in squats and the risk to the knees if they're not correct?
Okay, I guess first we have to define what's correct knee position. I think it's really accepted that we want to try to maintain the patella or knee alignment over roughly the second and third toe. So if we're looking at somebody during a squat, we want to make sure that knee is tracking in line with the center of the foot, essentially. As the knee moves into more of a valgus position, let's say where the patella moves medial to the second and third toe and maybe tracks more over the big toe or inside the big toe, you are going to increase stress to the ligamentous structures of the knee, as well as the underside of the patella. So, for every 10 degrees inside the big toe that goes, from a tracking perspective, you can increase stress on the ACL by 100% for every 10 degrees. And the patellofemoral joint contact forces underneath the kneecap can increase 45%. So while that may not do anything if it happens occasionally, if you have somebody who moves like that chronically under a load or at higher intensities and during more dynamic patterns, that could potentially lead to some problems later on. So it's not that you want to always completely avoid those or can completely avoid those positions, because the soft tissue system, connective tissues, they adapt just like anything else, and you can see hypertrophy in ligaments if they're put under the right amount of stress and allowed the right amount of recovery. But if you allow somebody to do those types of patterns chronically and repeatedly over time, that's going to lead to a breakdown, weakening of that tissue, and could increase the susceptibility of a non-contact type musculoskeletal injury.
That's fantastic. Thank you for taking that, Karen. Thank you for asking that question. Well done, Tony. Well done. Thank you so much for being here and being a resource for us. It's greatly appreciated having you on.
Thanks, Bernie. I appreciate it. It's good to see your smiling face. I know we've had some text messages, but it's always good to catch up with you. And I'm glad to have been a part of this. So thanks so much. And
yeah, man, you are welcome. Give them to Wendy and the little one. I hope everybody's well and staying safe. And I want to say the same thing to everybody out there listening. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're staying safe. And let's make the most of what we can right now. What are the things that we can control? And there's an opportune time for professional and personal development. So take advantage of these opportunities where there's a lot of tragedy going on. There's a lot of sadness going on. There's a lot of unknowns that are out there right now. They make a lot of people nervous. But let's focus on what we can do, not what we can't, and move forward. So thank you again for being on the show. Thank you for listening. You're here as the NASM CPT podcast.
Thanks.